First, George W. Bush apologised and now Obama, but how many times does a US president have to say sorry before American soldiers realise desecrating the Holy Qur'an is wrong? So what's up with NATO troops? Are they just dumb or really dumb? Tune into the agenda to get the real story behind the burning of the Qur'ans at the US base in Bagram, Afghanistan. Sorry seems to be the buzzword in Afghanistan these days when it comes to the behaviour of NATO troops. Angry protests have swept across Afghanistan after it emerged copies of the Holy Qur'an were deliberately destroyed by soldiers. Some Afghans and at least 2 American soldiers have died during a number of violent reactions, despite apologies from US President Barack Obama, US Ambassador Ryan Clark and various NATO chiefs. The incident at the US military base of Bagram is not the first case of Quranic abuse by NATO forces, and assurances have now been given that all 130,000 occupying troops will be trained within the next 2 weeks on how to identify, store and handle religious material. This is not the first time the actions of NATO troops have shocked Afghans into reacting violently. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service NSIS is currently heading a major inquiry into a video showing a number of US Marines urinating on the bodies of Afghan dead in the province of Helmand last year. And earlier this month, NATO top brass expressed regret over the deaths of 7 children aged 6 to 14 years caused by airstrikes as they sat around a campfire and played. Observers say the apology for accidental civilian deaths follows a long line of similar NATO apologies over the years. Today's agenda asks the question, Afghanistan, are NATO troops out of control? Scores of Afghans have been killed, 2 senior NATO officers shot in the back of the head, execution style, and half a dozen American soldiers injured in a grenade attack, all because someone at the US base in Bagram burned copies of the Holy Qur'an. Obama said it was an inadvertent act, but what does our hand-picked panel of experts think? Starting with political activist Ken O'Keefe, a former US Marine who has been so disgusted at his country's antics over the years, he renounced his citizenship and burned his US passport. Joining him is Sharif Nashashibi, an Arab journalist who said he was appalled at the actions of NATO soldiers and even more appalled at the reaction in the United States among some politicians. And American Carol Gould is very blunt about the Quran burning incident. She says it's time the Pentagon and US military serving abroad became more sensitive about other cultures and never ever burn any book ever again. She points out that the last military to burn books was the Nazi SS. Well, if we'd had this debate 10 years ago, ignorance could have been cited as an excuse, but surely you would have to be deaf, dumb and blind not to know that burning Islam's holiest book is going to inflame people. Could it have been a deliberate act of provocation, Carol?
In your clip that you showed at the beginning of the program, of the soldiers urinating on corpses, to me, of course, that was deliberate. That was horrendous, abhorrent. But I feel that what happened with the holy books was possibly stupidity of a couple of squaddies who were told to go out and get rid of some stuff from the base.
Well, apparently it was an officer.
Well, he should have known better. And as you say, if it were 10 years ago, it might be more understandable, but we have had 10 years of learning about sensitivity to the Middle East, to the Muslim world, to Islam, to the Holy Qur'an, and it's incredible that these people were doing this and didn't know that these were holy books.
Well, let me bring in Ken O'Keefe. I mean, many years ago you served as a Marine. You know the instructions given to soldiers. Were you surprised at this latest Quran burning act in Afghanistan? And do you think it was an accident?
No, it really is a diversionary tactic. The reality is that war is an ugly, nasty, brutal thing. And the Israelis like to say that they are the most moral army in the world. It's just more smoke and mirrors and illusions. Every nation that goes to war is going to have its sons and daughters involved in actions which would be called reprehensible and unacceptable. The real the real issue here is not the burning of the Qur'ans and the urinating on dead Afghanis. The real issue here is the farcical war on terror that was born out of the Project for a New American Century, which identified the Afghani nation as the prize jewel in a full spectrum dominance agenda, in which all of the mineral resources and the gas resources and the pipeline from Turkmenistan through that country to be able to deliver these resources to the world. That is the reason why we're there, and this is a diversion from that agenda and the farcical war on terror.
So you think that it was a deliberate act merely as a diversion?
Anything and everything that can be done to divert people's attention from the more important matter, i.e. that 9/11, the impetus for this invasion in the first place, is the ultimate false flag operation. It diverts our attention away from the fact that there are traitors to this day in the U.S. government who were involved in the cover-up of this false flag operation, Israeli Mossad directly involved in that operation, as well as intelligence agencies from other nations. So if I just may finish on this point, because it's critical to understanding what's actually happening, that it is because of this false flag operation that we're there in the first place. And if it is a false flag operation, then we should have left that place long ago. The American people should know this by now, and the world knows it largely, but our politicians and propagandists allow this illusion to persist, and this is a diversion.
If I can bring in Sharif Nashashibi, I mean, you're also the head of Arab Media Watch, and you see how these incidents are reported. Do you think that this was an accident, an oversight, an officer not realizing that he was handling Islamic text?
I don't see how it could have been inadvertent. I mean, a Quran is clearly identified as a Quran. It's not like, oh, here's a Quran, oh, whoops, it's on fire, what a pity. I mean, it doesn't happen that way. I think this was sheer insensitivity. It's not the first time that there has been a desecration of the Quran. And I think the issue is not necessarily the desecration of the Quran. It's about the desecration of a holy book, no matter what religion it is. I have no formal training on religious sensitivity, but I know that it is wrong to burn a holy book, whether it's the Quran or the Bible or the Torah. It's wrong. I don't need training to be told that. So I don't see how that is inadvertent.
So what is it? I mean, the question that we're looking at today is, are NATO troops out of control? Who's in charge?
Well, this is the thing. There has been a string of incidents, not just in Afghanistan, but in Iraq and elsewhere during this war on terror, that show that troops are utterly insensitive on issues that any moral person would know is wrong, and it's one thing after another, really inflaming public opinion.
If I'm not mistaken, pages of the Quran were flushed down the lavatory at Guantanamo Bay,
right.
And that started the riots, the huge riots, particularly in Pakistan. It was about 6 or 7 years ago.
And this plays perfectly well into the whole agenda as well, because we can't possibly leave, can we, if security can't be achieved by the occupied nation. So let's foster some more hatred, let's carry out some more false flag operations, let's bomb some mosques, and then use that as an excuse to stay.
Playing devil's advocate, it has been suggested that it was a deliberate act, knowing full well there would be a backlash, which would give NATO troops a good excuse to say, you know what, we're going to pull out now. They've already pulled ISAF forces out of the Interior Ministry and other key buildings in Kabul.
Well, they will get out, but it's not because they're going to do it for any altruistic reasons. They're going to get out because the world is finally going to realize that these criminals in NATO and the American imperial machine and those behind them are carrying out a policy which is intended to rape and pillage yet another third world nation, so rape it of its natural resources and be able to make the rich richer while the poor suck on it. That's the reality of what's happening, and eventually the people will win out. The Afghani people kicked the Soviets out. They're going to kick out the empire this time as well.
Well, Mohammed Walji investigates the history of the American military and Quranic abuse over the last 10 years since the war on terror was begun.
This is not the first time an American president has felt compelled to apologize for the behavior of US soldiers who have desecrated copies of the Holy Qur'an. In 2008, President George W. Bush publicly apologized to Iraq's Prime Minister following the desecration of a Quran when an American sniper deliberately used Islam's holy book for target practice. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki called on US military commanders to educate their soldiers to respect religion. Several reports of Quranic abuse by US soldiers first emerged in Guantanamo Bay shortly after it opened in January 2002. but one of the most serious, which involved a soldier deliberately flushing a copy down a toilet in order to torment the detainees, provoked outrage across the Muslim world. While some of these have resulted in violent demonstrations resulting in deaths, previous rallies have paled into insignificance in comparison to the events which unfolded in Afghanistan last week. Since the news that copies of the Qur'an had been burnt at Bagram airfield on February 20th, thousands of Afghans rioted for 5 days, leaving dozens killed. A grenade injured 6 American soldiers, and 2 US officers working inside the Afghan Interior Ministry were shot, execution style. It's hard to know if the violence might have been worse if Obama had not apologized. Afghans now have to judge for themselves whether Obama's apology was merely tactical after he called the burning inadvertent. Forgiveness does not come easily in Afghanistan if it is not delivered with sincerity.
Sharif Nashashibi, was Obama's apology sincere?
I think personally, I think he was being sincere. I don't buy this issue that the burning was inadvertent, but I think he realized straight away that this was going to be a very serious incident, and the apology is, I think, not just towards the Afghans and Muslims in general, but also to safeguard U.S. troops. We've seen all the attacks that have ensued since then, some of them by Afghan security forces. So, Obama's first reaction would be, I need to limit the damage to this. And I think the apology was sincere, but I don't think there was any excuse for it.
What about the reaction in America itself? Because quite a few politicians were furious that the US president had apologized.
It's shocking. I saw Mitt Romney being interviewed, Newt Gingrich. They're furious about this apology, and I think this is absolutely absurd. We're talking about the desecration of a religious book. This is wrong. You don't have to be Muslim or religious to think so.
And of course, George W. Bush had apologized similarly for actions in Iraq.
So these Republican candidates, they are just pandering to the most extreme elements. By being obstinate about this. It's absolutely shocking and dangerous, not just to Muslims, but also to Americans abroad.
Carol, were you shocked by the reaction in your country?
I'm not shocked by anything that the Republican field of candidates says at the moment, because they're so extreme. I wouldn't say Romney's as extreme as Santorum and Gingrich and Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry. They've left the campaign, but while they were running, they were coming out with the most extraordinary statements. But nothing shocks me when it comes from the Republican field of candidates. They just keep moving more and more to the right as each week passes.
But what did you think of the Obama apology? Was it sincere?
Well, I felt...
Bearing in mind, he must have known every word would be scrutinized.
Yeah, that I felt it was sincere. I also felt it helped that Hamid Karzai asked for calm. So these elements did help. I did want to ask you, you were saying that how did they not know it wasn't the Holy Qur'an, but how could they read the writing? It wouldn't be in English. These soldiers, even if it was an officer, they probably wouldn't know any more than if you have a Jewish Siddur and it's all in Hebrew, that your average white Anglo-Saxon Protestant person won't know what it is. But those troops have been there
for over a decade. They should know by now. This should be the first thing that they learn about, to identify this.
Well, let me bring in Ken, because you were in the military.
Having been in a war, I'll repeat what I said to start off. The best way to make sure that none of these things happen is to not be in a war in the first place. Only legitimate self-defense is the reason for going to war.
But what sort of training did you have as a Marine? Were you given cultural awareness courses?
Let's not delude ourselves, all right? Any kind of training doesn't matter. When you're in a situation where you're being shot at and you're being ordered to kill other people, it doesn't matter what training you get. You're going to act emotionally, you're going to act in a way that is pure adrenaline, and you're going to commit crimes. That's the bottom line.
That they are out of control.
People are going to rape young girls. People are going to kill people in cold blood. They're going to urinate on dead people. They're going to burn Qur'ans. They're going to do all that kind of stuff and more. That's inherent in war. And it's not just America. It's every nation that goes to war is going to have its sons and daughters do that. Again, this Republican-Democrat thing, all the world is a stage. Obama is a puppet. He reads the script. He's a teleprompter reader. That's his official job. He doesn't make any decisions.
Strings?
The powers that be that have the majority of power in this world are those that control the financial system. The financial crisis engineered by these same criminals who are the ultimate fraudsters of the world. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, those are the real string pullers. That's real power. I wish we had more time to talk about that.
Well,
I'd be happy to do it.
if I can bring Carol in, this is quite depressing because Ken's given us a very graphic description of what it's like to be in a war. If what he's saying is true and he has first-hand experience, are NATO troops out of control?
It's possible. I'll take you back to the time when my mother was in the U.S. Army in World War II, based at Camp Pickett, Virginia, which is my next book that I'm writing about, of the unbelievable racism that the black soldiers were put in separate barracks, while the German and Italian POWs were playing pool and they were going to church and to the cinema at an American base in Virginia. And she was nearly court-martialed for protesting when the GIs used to stand and watch the black soldiers march and called them wackoons. So, and I'm afraid I think this is still endemic, as you say, not just in the American military, but in all the military around the world.
We have to ask
it's
Sharif.
possible they are out of control still.
Then we have to ask Sharif: is there a recruitment issue problem here, or Western troops, NATO troops, being picked and not being filtered?
Well, I think, recruitment as a trend has been down in the US and Britain, since this war on terror started. So I think there is a sense that, they'll take who they can get. And because of rising poverty and stuff, there are people joining the army because it's simply the only way to put food on the table or have some money. So yeah, I think vetting is not up to par. They'll take who they can get, and unfortunately, you have people who go that they're kids, they're still children with a huge amount of power of life over other people. And a lot of them have never left the US. They have absolutely no knowledge of the countries that they're going to. And it's shocking, and lessons are not being learned.
Not bilingual. Whereas you go to any Middle Eastern country or any Asian country, anywhere, everyone speaks 2 or 3 languages. Americans join the military and they know English, and that's it. I'm not making an excuse for the burning of the Qur'an, but there is not much education in cultural sensitivities, even if they don't join the military.
What about inside the barracks? What will the reaction be from the soldiers on the ground to this outrage that's pouring out at the moment?
Well, thankfully there are those within the ranks of the U.S. military who've expressed what they really feel about the war by supporting only one candidate in America, and that's Ron Paul. He receives more funding from active duty military than all the other candidates combined. Why is that? Because he's the only one who will get them out of the hell that their traitorous governments, these chicken hawks who would never go to war themselves, have sent off American sons and daughters to do this dirty work.
On that point, and it's certainly an interesting one, let's move over to our electronic mail room. As usual, our Facebook followers flooded us with their responses to today's topics, and Mohammed Walji selects the best ones.
Thanks, Yvonne. Well, the ongoing violence and fallout over the Quran burning issue certainly provoked a storm of protest among our Facebook followers when they heard about today's debate. Hafsa reckons, NATO is out of control all over the world. What they do in Libya is proof that they have a specific agenda and don't care about innocent people. While Ghazala Butt observes, since it costs nothing to apologize, they will keep committing these atrocities and keep apologizing if the Afghanistani government is stupid or coward enough to accept them. Shihab Khan from Bhopal in India is in no doubt they are out of control in Afghanistan. Some reports say that the Afghan security doesn't exercise 100% control even in some parts of Kabul. And this desecration of the Quran couldn't come at a worse time. Shah Islam in Leicester writes, Karzai is a US puppet. NATO has no accountability. They can do whatever they want and get away with it. Same as the US and any other foreign troops in Afghanistan. Doesn't matter how many innocent civilians are killed, their deaths are just seen as collateral damage, victims of war, when in reality it's just cold-blooded murder. Axman Dur Isaac from Oxford University comes up with his own peace initiative and remarks, in the Pentagon there are far-right Christians and in both Democratic and Republican parties, as well as new atheists who regard Muslims and Islam as evil, and the former must be killed, tortured and jailed, and the latter must be destroyed. So we need to study their policies and adapt new tools in order to engage with them. Sylvie's Mustafa's advice for NATO is blunt and to the point. Get out of Afghanistan. But Farooq Kangeri points the finger of blame elsewhere. He declares, we Muslims are to blame. There are nearly 50 Muslim countries and none of them have a powerful army or government to Western powers. Amal responds to Farooq by saying, if all Muslim countries become united, they will have a large arm. And if they fight for the sake of Allah and not just to defend democracy, then Allah will grant them victory if He wills. Well, on that note, that's all we've got time for. Back to you, Yvonne.
Thanks very much for that, Mohammed. Well, in the last few minutes, let's get our guests' concluding remarks. Starting with you, Ken. You know, the question is, are NATO troops out of control?
No, war is out of control, and those who are destroying this world by fraud and deception is what's out of control. 9/11 was the false flag operation used to justify the invasion of Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden said directly in the aftermath that he had nothing to do with it. No case has gone to trial convicting Osama bin Laden or the so-called 19 hijackers, which includes people who were going to strip joints, snorting cocaine, and drinking booze, supposedly on a jihad. Building 7 is the smoking gun, which makes clear that thermite was used to bring down those buildings in a controlled demolition. And all of this was done by Zionists and American traitors, along with intelligence agencies from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. It is the ultimate deception, and it's done for a full-spectrum dominance agenda, which is part of controlling this world by deception. And unless we as people stand up to these treasonous traitors and all of those people carrying out this stuff, and the colluders, including the mass media and the politicians, we are going to continue to get this kind of deception. Well, and I must say, love and respect to all of the Afghani people, Iraqi people, and the Palestinians, and everyone else who's fighting the empire. And Sister Afia Siddiqui must be freed.
Right.
Period.
And if we can move on to you, Carol, are NATO soldiers out of control in Afghanistan?
Well, it's possible. I don't understand how you come up with this concept of the Mossad.
I will debate you publicly on this very subject. Please,
okay,
there it is.
Another day.
Let's focus on
I don't
the
like to
question.
see any book burned, because that's what the Nazis did. They were famous for book burning. A Jewish Bible has to be buried. Even a Jewish person who eats pork and shellfish and isn't religious.
So what's your advice to the U.S. military and NATO?
As I said yesterday when I wrote about this, is the Pentagon has got to get real about once and for all educating its troops to the sensitivities of the part of the world where they are based, and not to do anything that offends people, whether this was deliberate or not. They've got to educate their troops.
And Sharif Nashashibi, are they out of control? What's the solution, and why don't they seem to be learning from the past?
The solution is that this is just one example of the need for U.S. troops to leave Afghanistan and all the countries in which they're present for the war on terror. They are not there for the good of the Afghans. They are there for their own interests. Time and again this has been shown. A U.S. Army officer just came back from Afghanistan and said that there was an absence of success on almost every level. And that's true. I mean, in the last 10 years, what has been achieved in Afghanistan? It's a complete mess.
So what was in this officer's mind when he decided to burn the Qur'an?
I just think he just couldn't care less about the sensitivities of the Muslims who surrounded him. It was simple ignorance and insensitivity.
Well, on that depressing note, it just remains for me to say a very big thank you to Sharif, Carol and Ken. And we'll see you all soon on the next agenda.